Don't let mosquitoes ruin your day. Fight the bite by removing standing water on your property. Standing water of any kind is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Do your part and help reduce the mosquito population. Visit hcfl.gov/fightthebite.
Good morning and welcome to the Environment Protection Commission meeting for Thursday, February the 20th. We will have our Pledge of Allegiance and invocation given by our chaplain, Commissioner Cameron Cepeda. Everyone can please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you have made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. We thank you for this meeting. We thank you for our EPC. What a great team we have here. And we thank you for the gifts and talents that you've given each and every one of them, and all the blessings that they have been to us in our county. We ask you to bless this meeting in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Can we have a roll call, please, to know Commissioner Hagan is virtual?
Chair Myers,
Here.
Commissioner Cameron Cepeda,
Here.
Cohen,
Here.
Bowles,
Here.
Woolstel,
Here.
Miller,
Here.
Hagan.
Here.
You have a quorum, ma'am.
Thank you. Agenda, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, Commissioner, we do not.
Okay. Then we'll move right to any removal of consent items? Just want it for the record.
No, Commissioner.
Okay. Then we'll move right into our recognition and proclamations.
Thank you.
Good morning again.
Good morning, Commissioners. Today, we're going to honor Joan Hallgren, who's been with our agency for 23 years of public service with the Environmental Protection Commission. Joan was born in Elmhurst, Illinois, and grew up on a farm near Palmyra, Missouri. Inspired by nature and Jane Goodall, she pursued a career in natural sciences, earning a BA in biology from Tarkio College in 1980. Joan joined EPC in 2002. Since then, she investigated over 4,000 complaints. In her position as the agency's noise program coordinator, and we all know that we get lots of calls for that, she has been involved in over 650 noise monitoring events, often outside business hours and late at night. We thank her for her proven excellence, dedication, and team-first attitude in helping to protect local natural resources and enhance the quality of life in Hillsborough County. Now I'm going to ask Joan and the whole team, Air Director Diana Lee, Cody, and Jeff to come on up here. Come on up, Joan. We're going to miss Joan. Joan's very involved in our Toastmasters. We have one of the largest Toastmasters in the county, and we have a lot of county employees that come to our agency. I think she's still going to stay involved in Toastmasters. And she's just a joy to work with, very dedicated, and a lot of fun, always a smile on her face. And sometimes these complaints from constituents can be very challenging. So with that, Joan? Come on up.
Good morning.
And we're going to give you an award, too. You want me to do that first?
I don't care.
Okay, well, why don't we do that? Cody, why don't you grab that, and we'll do that, and then we'll... So we're going to give this recognition award. It's the Environmental Stewardship Award, and it's presented to Joan today for her 23 years of service protecting the local resources of our county. And it says, "Love and best wishes, your EPC family." February 20th, 2025. We won't make you hold the big picture.
Okay. I just want to say that I've really enjoyed working for the citizens of Hillsborough County, and I never did this alone. I want to acknowledge my former coworkers, Robert, Mel, and Madeline, our longtime boss, Marvin Blunt, and I feel very, very confident with the new people that are on board. They're all relatively new, have been with the section for less than a year, but they're very competent, and I'm feeling very optimistic about everything. I want to thank my mentors, Kay Struther, Sterling Woodard, Jerry, Reggie, and I know I'm forgetting people, but Janet does a great job, Deanna does a great job, and Cody and Jeff Sims as well. do a very good job, and they have everything well in hand, and I'm going to enjoy my retirement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Joan, as you start a new chapter in your life called retirement, enjoy it, and we wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Don't see anyone in the queue. Come on, we take a picture back here. Okay, for public comments, we have one speaker, Pamela Moore. Is Pamela Moore here? Okay. No. Okay, we'll move right along to approving the consent agenda. We have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposers?
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Then we go right into our regular agenda. Janet?
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to bring up Dr. Chris Anastasio. He just had a newspaper article in Tarpon Springs, but he is with the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and he's going to present an overview of the district's seagrass mapping program and a status update of the current seagrass of Tampa Bay. Dr. Anastasio is the Chief Water Quality Scientist and Seagrass Mapping Lead at SwiftMud. He earned a PhD in Chemical and Physical Oceanography and in Marine Science from USF and has over 25 years' experience in water-related research and projects, making him an expert on this subject. I'd also like to thank him for his service as he's a commander in the United States Naval Reserve. And with that, Dr. Anastasio.
Good morning.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Dr. Chris Anastasio. I want to thank you for inviting me to come and kind of talk a little bit about our seagrass mapping program at the Southwest Florida Water Management District. I'm going to kind of take this in three parts. I just wanted to kind of give you all an overview of the program, what we've done, and then really kind of talk a little bit about the process of mapping seagrass, how we do it, kind of what goes into that, and then talk a little bit about the status and trends. Now, unfortunately, our official numbers don't come out for about another month, so I'm more than happy to come back and really delve into the most recent results, but I will, at the end of my presentation, give you just kind of a high-level overview of what to expect when those numbers do come out in a few weeks. So the first thing I want to do is really just kind of give you an overview of the program that the district has been doing now since really 1984. We really started mapping in earnest as far back as 1988, and we've been doing this for the region that we call the Suncoast, which is Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, Tampa Bay, south to Charlotte Harbor, every 2 years, roughly in the beginning, but since about the 2000s, we've been mapping this region every 2 years. And so 2024, this past year, is the most recent results, which I'm not going to present to you today, but I will give you, again, a little high-level preview of what to expect. But we also have another region across our 16-county area. We call it the Springs Coast, and that's because many of the rivers that feed into the Gulf are spring-fed. And this is an area that goes roughly from Anclote Key north to Wackasassa Bay, which is just east of Cedar Key, and you can see that region on the map. It's about 1,280 square miles. And I just want to, I'm going to talk a little bit about that region just to kind of contrast the seagrass that we have in that region relative to what we see in the estuaries of the region that we call the Suncoast. One of the things I do want to stress is that this is really a continuous process. So this is something that we do continuously. There's no beginning and end, really. Once we're getting ready to release numbers, we're getting ready to start the mapping process all over again. So right now, with the Suncoast coming out in March, we're getting ready to start the process all over again. And next year at this time, we'll actually be in the air flying, collecting imagery for the 26 maps. So it's a continuous process. I mean, it is one of the most comprehensive seagrass mapping programs, I think, anywhere in the world. Chesapeake Bay has been doing this since the 1970s, and a lot of what we do was based originally on the work that is being done and had been done in Chesapeake. But other than that, this is really one of the premier mapping programs anywhere. And how we do this is we kind of break down each of these larger regions into, and I'll call them mapping regions for the Springs Coast, because as you can see, there really is no discrete estuary boundary. These are relatively arbitrary. We try to keep these segments around some of the mouths of the spring-fed rivers in the Springs Coast. So Crystal River, Homosassa, Chassahowitzka, Weeki Wachee, and then on down. And we have most of these segments, we have a nearshore and an offshore component. But really what we're going to focus on today is the Suncoast estuaries and specifically Tampa Bay. A little bit easier to delineate these because these are really more discrete estuaries. And as you can see, like I said, you know, we have the Suncoast region made up of Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, Tampa Bay south to Charlotte Harbor. And what you'll see when we get into Tampa Bay is that we further subdivide these into segments. But before we look at the status and trends, I want to talk a little bit about the process of how we map seagrass. So we do this using aerial imagery, primarily, with a lot of field work that goes into this as well. But what we do is we acquire imagery via aircraft, and of course it's digital imagery today. It wasn't always that way. Back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, we were collecting film photography, but we've since advanced beyond that. And there's really three, I would say, elements to the seagrass mapping that we do. The acquisition, of course, is a very important piece because it's the imagery that we use to make the maps. And then, of course, the photo interpretation, which I'll talk about a little bit. But I also want to stress that the field verification piece is very important as well. And we'll go into a little bit of detail on that here in a second. So acquisition. This is a map just showing you some of the flight lines that the aircraft flies to collect the imagery. And we do have a flight window, which is December 1st through the end of February. Ideally, I will tell you that the 24 maps were a very big challenge. Last winter was an El Nino winter, which meant we had skies that were very much like what you see out there today. We had rain, we had a lot of challenges with the weather. So we actually had to move a little bit later into March. And in some areas, we even had to fly as late as the first week of April in order to collect the imagery because the conditions were just not optimal. It was very challenging last year. But you could see that we use an aircraft. It's typically a twin or single engine. The camera, it's hard to see in this picture, but if you look under the bottom of the aircraft, you'll see this dark square. That's basically a hole in the fuselage where the digital camera is mounted. So these aircraft are specially designed to collect aerial imagery. And as I kind of indicated with the issues that we had with the weather, there's a whole set of go, no-go criteria that we have before we give the okay for flight. Sun angle, tides, obviously the sky condition. Because we are collecting imagery of things underwater, it's especially challenging. So we need to have proper clarity. We need to have, wind is a big consideration because as you know, if it's windy, you get turbid waters and it's hard to see through the water column. So all these things have to mesh together in order for us to get the plane up in the air to collect our imagery. And it's very challenging. We have basically daily calls with the flight crew and we go over the forecast. It's a lot. So we're very fortunate to have those images. And as you know, or may not know, the imagery that we collect is very specialized. So it's a lot of people ask, why don't you just use satellite imagery or there's drones? This imagery is collected specifically for the purpose of mapping seagrass. And I'm not going to go through all these bullets, but I just want to highlight that there is a lot that goes into what we call the post-processing. So getting the images is a challenge in and of itself. But then once you get the imagery, you have to post-process it. And I'll tell you, a lot of times these images don't look like they're images of the surface of the earth. They look very strange to the untrained eye because, again, the point is to bring out the bottom features so that the photo interpreters can create the maps. And all this has to happen under the supervision of the district's surveyor. So we have a very strict set of specifications for the imagery and then also for the post-processing. So it takes a while, is really the bottom line. A lot of people ask, why does it take almost a year to get these maps done? Well, a lot of it is because of all the stuff that has to happen in the background. It takes a while to post-process, and then ultimately all these images, and you can see in the image to the right on the slide, there's different types of digital cameras. This one is actually a frame camera, but usually what we like to use is called a push broom, and it's basically a camera that goes back and forth as the aircraft is flying along its line, and all those lines have to then be stitched together to create this seamless image, which is what the photo interpreters use. So there's a lot that goes into it, and that's why it takes a while. The other element that's really important in our mapping process is the field verification, and this is where folks like EPC, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, the state, there's a lot of partners that we work with to collect a lot of this field data. So, you know, through this whole process, we don't do this in a vacuum and we don't do this alone. We really rely on our partners, and a lot of that information comes in the form of these field verification points. You all know that we have these fixed transects in Tampa Bay. We've been collecting data there for decades. And I know EPC is involved. We have several transects. It's all coordinated through the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And that's really important information because it gives us an idea of what's actually there, and we can cross-check what the photo interpreters are seeing on the imagery. We also go out and collect a lot of data. You can see the map in the middle there. That's from 2022. It kind of gives you an idea of how many points we collect. All total, we collect about 2,000 field verification points just for the Suncoast region alone. So there's a lot of field work that goes into making these maps as accurate as they can be. And then, of course, the nuts and bolts of this whole process is the photo interpretation. So this is where a trained photo interpreter, or actually a team of photo interpreters, use these imagery. They also have a lot of institutional knowledge, and they also have the pass maps that they can go by as well. And they look at the signature on these images, and that's how we base these maps. Now, what we use is, we call it a modified Florida Land Use Land Cover Classification System, or FLUX system. And we map several different types of features within these potential seagrass areas. But the ones I want to just focus on for today are the two codes that we use for seagrass, because that's ultimately what these are seagrass maps. And so there's two main flux codes that we use to map seagrass. The first one is called continuous, and the other is called patchy or sparse. So as the name would imply, a continuous seagrass cover would be a dense seagrass meadow that you can see on the photo on the left. Typically, it's a percent cover that's going to be anywhere between 25 to 100%. So it's really nice, thick, dense seagrass. That's what we want. We want that really nice seagrass. But we also have a lot of these areas that are either patchy or sparse. This example here, you can see the little patches, those donuts, those little round features. But actually, when you look at the lighter green in that image, that's actually seagrass as well, and that's what we would consider more sparse, less than 25%. One thing to keep in mind here that's really important is when the percent cover at any given location is less than about 10%, we can't really see it from the air. So these aircraft are flying around 9,000 feet. And so a lot of times we will get information from the field, or people will see our maps and go, hey, there's seagrass there. I know there's grass there. And then when we look at it, that grass is really sparse. If you see 2 or 3 shoots of seagrass, it's there, but we can't see it. So just keep that in mind. And that's okay, because what that basically is it gives us a more conservative estimate of what's out there. And we know that there's more seagrass there, we just can't see it. The other thing that I did include here, which is not a seagrass classification, is attached algae. And the reason I wanted to include that here is because, as you all know, macroalgae is becoming more and more of an issue in our estuaries here on the west coast of Florida. And while we don't map drift algae, and the reason we don't is because by definition it drifts, it moves around, and it moves around in areas that aren't necessarily where seagrass are. So it would be a bit misleading to map drift algae in these maps. So we don't map it. We do, however, annotate it. All our field work is done with video, so we have GoPros and we have other means to collect video underwater. So of those 2,000 points, almost all of them have small, short video snippets attached to them, so we can actually see what's there. More importantly, future Chris can go back and look at those images as well and those videos and see what we saw today, which is really important for continuity. But attached algae is important, and so we do map that, but it's not included, obviously, as in the total acreage for seagrass because it's not a seagrass. The other thing I wanted to just point out is that as you see these acreage estimates, and you know, we pay a lot of attention to the trends that we see, we're only representing the spatial distribution of the grass. We're not making any statements on either the species composition or the quality of the grass. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's where the field work, the transect monitoring and other in-water field work is really, really important, because that's what gives us the insight as to the condition of the grass and what grasses are actually out there. Okay, that's kind of a whirlwind tour of how we map grass. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take you through very quickly sort of where we've been and where we are and where it looks like we're going to be going in 2024 with respect to the numbers. Before I get to Tampa Bay, though, I just wanted to show you the Springs Coast. Now, remember I said we only map that every 4 years. So we are coming out with the 24 numbers. That'll be later on in the spring and probably May timeframe. So the last update was in 2020. And I just wanted to show this to you all just to show you how much seagrass we have out there. In 2020, we mapped over 586,000 acres. That's a lot of grass. It's actually part of the Big Bend region of Florida, and it's the largest, one of the largest seagrass areas in the world. Beautiful grass, and it's not just grass, it's a mix. It's a very complicated area to map because you don't just get seagrass. You get macroalgae, you get coral, you get all sorts of sponges and other things, and hard bottom habitat. So it's a diverse kind of matrix of habitat types. So it's very challenging to map, but the bottom line is that there's a lot of grass out there. And the other thing about the Springs Coast region is that it's remained relatively stable over the last decade or so. As you can see, between 2016 and 2020, we only saw about a 1.5% change, which in map speak is virtually no change. So, you know, when you think about the challenge that I just showed you of mapping grass the way we do, a 1% change is almost within the noise level of the map. So anything really between 0 to about 3% is sort of in that noise level. I like to use the chemistry analogy that when you get a water quality sample back from the laboratory, there's a minimum detection limit. Our minimum detection limit is somewhere between 1 to 3%. And then you have a practical quantitative limit, which is for us in seagrass mapping about 5%. So anything between 3 to 5%, it's starting to look like a real number. Anything less than 3, we could call that no change or little to no change. So that's where we are really with the Springs Coast. So now let's look at the Sun Coast. And yes, unfortunately, we're a little early for the 24 numbers. This was from 22. You probably can remember these numbers from the 22 results. Tampa Bay, we saw a 12% reduction or loss in grass baywide. That was not good news in 22. So I will just tell you that 24, the news will be better. So that's good. We are doing better in 24 than we were in 22. But you can see that the loss was not specific to Tampa Bay. We saw losses across the entire region, with the exception of St. Joe Sound and Clearwater Harbor, which really is more akin to the Springs Coast region than the estuaries of Tampa Bay to Charlotte Harbor. Very similar to Anclote and those regions north of us. So not surprising that that one has a different trend. And then you're going to see a slide like this in about a month that's going to be very similar to this one, but it's going to have the 24 numbers on it. And what we do is, we segment these estuaries into individual base segments. And as you may or may not remember, in 22, the big story was the loss that we saw in Old Tampa Bay. Old Tampa Bay has struggled over the last several years, really since about 2016, 2018. And I will tell you that we still are going to see some loss in Old Tampa Bay in 24. But the good news is it's the only segment in Tampa Bay where we will see loss in 24. So that's good news. Overall, things look better in 24 than they do in 22, with the exception of Old Tampa Bay. So that still continues to be the issue. And of course, we're engaged with the EPC, with all our partners through the Tampa Estuary Program, Nitrogen Management Consortium, to try to figure out what's going on in Old Tampa Bay. The other thing that we'll see is the change map, and this is again from the 22 example, and not unlike the 22 map, where most of that red is going to be in Old Tampa Bay for 24. So this is the old 22 map, but most of the red that you'll see in 24 is going to be in Old Tampa Bay. One thing I will add for 2024 is Hillsborough Bay will look much better than it did in 2022. Most of that red is now green. So good news for Hillsborough Bay. We're expecting to see some pretty good numbers for Hillsborough Bay, which is great news for that system. So again, our draft maps are coming out in a few weeks, and we do have, so March 26th, we do have scheduled now, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program is coordinating this, the Seagrass Working Group meeting. It's open to the public. It will be held at FWRI at the Steidinger Auditorium. It's in the morning. I believe it's like 9:30 or 10:30 to 12:30 or something like that. And the focus of that meeting is going to be to release the results. So that's sort of the official public release of our 24 seagrass numbers. Will be on March 26th, which is a Wednesday, I believe. And then a couple months after that, the Springs Coast will be releasing those numbers probably in May of 2025. So the last thing I wanted to do is just leave you all with a couple of ways to get access to our data. You might be familiar with this website. This is our open data portal. You can download all our seagrass maps from this portal. Might go all the way back to 1988, and it's not just for Tampa Bay. Obviously, it's for the entire region. So if there are maps available, you can get to them from this website. But the other thing I wanted to do is just take a moment, and you may or may not be aware of this tool. This is relatively new. It's about a year old, and it's still sort of as a work in progress, but it is available for everyone to use if you scan the QR code or go to the website. I do recommend that you use Google Chrome if you're going to use this tool, because on Edge I found it's a little clunky. We're still working out the bugs with Esri, who is the company that makes ArcPro. But what this tool allows you to do is it allows you to not only look at the seagrass maps, but also the imagery. And you can pan across any estuary in the Sun Coast. So we haven't done this for the Springs Coast yet, but for Tampa Bay, you can select 2 years, and this goes back to 99, so it doesn't go all the way back to 88. We're working on getting those in here as well. But you can go all the way back to 1999, and you can compare the 2 years, and you can zoom in, you can pan around anywhere you want. You can also select by base segments. So in this case, you can have lower Tampa Bay, and it will pull up some figures that will show you the trends in both the patchy and the continuous and the total seagrass acreage. So it's a really nice tool. The other thing that you can do is if you look in the middle of the screen on the top there, you can see the extent or segment. If you click on the extent, the numbers on the right, those totals will actually update depending on what extent that you're at. So in this case, I zoomed into this area of Boca Ciega Bay, and it shows the numbers for that extent, which is really useful for folks that aren't necessarily interested in the entire bay or a static map of one particular bay segment, but you can actually zoom into areas and you can look at the change across those years that you select. And we're not just talking about the previous mapping cycle and the current one. Now you can select any year from 99 to, in this case, 22, and look at the change. So it's a really cool tool. I encourage you all to check it out. And please, please, please do send me feedback if you do check it out. If there's issues, we're always looking for that. It's, as I said, it's still sort of in the beta phase, but we want to definitely get the word out that this tool is available for folks to use. Last thing I want to do is, again, just shout out to all our partners. We cannot do this without you all, without all the partners that we work very closely with across our entire district coast. So I definitely want to make sure that we give them recognition. And of course, this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are many more partners than this. I don't have a screen big enough to fit them all on there. And then the last thing I want to do is just leave you with my contact information. So as you do, if you do play around with that tool, as you have any questions, don't hesitate. Give me a call, shoot me an email. I'm available. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
And we thank you for the education experience on seagrass. Thank you so much. This time, Commissioner Woolston.
Thanks, Doc. You answered my first question. I was going to ask for your contact information. A year ago, maybe more, Sam El-Rabi had come in here and talked to us about the challenges, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, of planting seagrass and getting it to stick, basically.
Right.
So recently, there was another conspiracy theory kind of debunked that was, us dumping all of this reclaimed water. One thing they didn't test for was pharmaceuticals. For a while, that was considered a conspiracy theory, and in fact, FIU recently did a study. Are you familiar with the Bonefish Trust study?
I am, yeah. They gave I think it was one of the other estuary program technical advisory committees. They gave a presentation. Actually, it might have been the Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I don't remember which one, but it discovered that we don't test for pharmaceuticals in this reclaimed water that was considered safe for even, some have argued it's considered safe for drinking, which now is emphatically not. And they're finding like 7 to 15 pharmaceuticals. But the more I read into it, it suggested that the seagrass, which is essentially like a natural microbial filtration system, that there is early signs that it might participate in filtering out some pharmaceuticals. Have you had a chance to look into that, or have any considerations of whether or not seagrass will be able to help naturally filter that out?
No, I'm not aware there's much research out there on that, but that's something I'm definitely interested in. I will take a look at, because we know that seagrass, like any plants, they are bioremediators. They can uptake certain toxins, which is why we have things like, marshes that are used to help mitigate toxic, contaminated sites. But I have not seen any research on that with seagrass specifically.
It's very early research.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just of the mindset that, our #1 attraction for tourism in Hillsborough County is not the sports facilities, it's our water. And the more that's eroded, the more we're going to lose that attraction to the area. So I was going to be inviting Sam. I'm going to try and get with a group called, it's a private group called the Tampa Bay Waterkeepers, who I've really been tracking a lot of this information on recently. But I'm of the mindset that our tourist development taxes should be going towards rehabilitating our water, because it's our #1 tourist attraction in the area. So I'm going to keep looking at that. But if I get to a meaningful point, I'll reach out to you and invite you to come to those conversations, because I think that it's a serious one that we, especially with those numbers. I mean, 50% loss in Hillsborough Bay. So you're saying down to 400 or so. What's your measurable units when it said down 800 to 400 in Hillsborough Bay of seagrass? Like what does that count based off of? Like area coverage, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's based on the change in the aerial extent of the grass. Now, I will caveat that was a huge loss, and in fact, if you look from 2016 to 2022, Hillsborough Bay lost about 80% of its grass. So it's been a big loss. That number is going to change in '24, I'll tell you that. we've seen a more than doubling of that grass. Now, just as important as the top line number is important the type of grass, and that's why, you know, these transects are very important. But even on our maps, one thing I would, and I'll do, and I do stress this when I give these numbers, that it's important to look at the different classification, the flux code. Is it sparse, patchy grass, or is it continuous grass? Because that gives you a little insight on the robustness, on the resiliency of that particular meadow. And in Hillsborough Bay, we know that's a boom and bust economy. And so a lot of that gain that you're going to see in '24, and it is significant, is all sparse grass, mostly haliduli, some halophila. And so we know those grasses can come and go. So while it's great news that we're going to see a big increase in Hillsborough Bay, you could potentially just as easily lose it the next year. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not just the acreage numbers, but it's what's there that matters as well. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about with respect to, you know, what we would call sublethal stress, or in the health industry, you'd call it pre-existing conditions. It makes a big difference. If your grass is healthy and robust, it can handle the next hurricane. If it's sort of on the edge, it may be enough to tip it over.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. So actually sort of following along this, what does it tell you when you see a loss outside of the 3 to 5%? What does that mean is actually happening in the water?
There's two ways to interpret that. So the change across a 2-year period could be a one-off, or it could be a trend. That's why it's so important that we have this long-term data set.
But what is the trend? So what do you do about it? I mean, what's causing it? What alarm does that ring?
Yes.
For you?
So what that does is that raises the alarm for the resource management community at large that something is happening. Old Tampa Bay, great example of that. You know, we've seen back-to-back losses. We will see a loss again in '24. That tells us that there's a problem. Something is going on, and that has. It is, I'd like, you know, I would say that our maps are a direct result of what has come since then, which is a lot of attention being now paid to Old Tampa Bay. A lot of that effort is being coordinated through the estuary program, but there's no doubt all hands are on deck for Old Tampa Bay, and we know that because of these maps.
So what are we doing? I mean, that is my question, because we had these storm events where you had a tremendous amount of runoff into Old Tampa Bay. I mean, the water literally comes down from Pasco County and just keeps flowing through all of these different canals and systems. Do we just assume that that's what's caused this, or are we doing something to mitigate?
It's the latter. So, you know, think of our seagrass maps more like when you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure. And if there's a problem, then likely your physician will refer you to a specialist. So this is like taking the pulse of the estuary. If there's a problem and there's clearly an issue in Old Tampa Bay, then we will refer to the community at large, the scientific community at large, which is, again, really, I would say the Tampa Bay Estuary Program is the one coordinating a lot of that effort. I think it would be good to have them come and maybe give you all an update on what has been happening with the Nitrogen Management Consortium. I don't want to speak for them, but there's a lot of work going on.
I guess where I'm going with this is that I think this analysis that our county, that we have contracted with Black and Veatch with the stormwater flooding, I think that there's a relationship between what you're doing and that.
Yes.
And that we ought to make sure that that we understand what's actually happening, because as we make decisions about, you know, our stormwater systems, we need to know how things are affecting the downstream and our water quality in the bay. I think that these things are related, and I'm not entirely sure that the two different sides are speaking to each other in all of this. So I think that's something that we may want to follow up on.
Absolutely. And Commissioner, I'll let you know, Commissioner Bowles is on the estuary program currently now. And, some of the things that the Nitrogen Management Consortium is a group of industries that reduce nitrogen loading. And so again, if it goes back to the estuary program, they can meet with the Nitrogen Management Consortium and also the community at large. There's been some fertilizer bans that have happened on both sides of the bay. And even this board. I mean, Commissioner, I think it was you who helped us make a motion to write a letter for the Howard Franklin, and that's the problem with Old Tampa Bay is the flushing. You just have a brand new bridge that was created, and at the time, this board and some legislators wrote to have more pipes put in so that there could be a flushing. That is a problem with the bay. It just circulates the
And
bad
Courtney
water.
Campbell is a big problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So these are things that with this information, our water quality information, their seagrass information, the estuary program, we can get together as a scientific community and say, how do we tackle this? They're also looking at temperature. There's new studies on temperature that's never been done before. I think the temperature, and correct me if I'm wrong, was 81 degrees, and now it's moved up to about 83 degrees. My late husband and I used to fish all the time, and we'd go 2.5 hours out, and the fish are moving farther and farther offshore because of temperatures. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of our fish have moved up to the Alabama region. So all of those things affect seagrass, not just nitrogen loading. So it's kind of trying to look at things in a holistic way and do these new, perhaps looking at endocrines and pharmaceuticals or, and uptake with that, but also, how do we look at temperature and other things that affect the estuary?
I would encourage you to also visit the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's website. They do a very nice job of doing a state of the bay report. It's every year, and it's really what you're talking about. It's a summation of all the data, the water quality data that you guys collect, the seagrass mapping, and they put all this into a really nice, very, very succinct state of the bay report. It's basically 2 pages. But it gives you, it breaks it down by base segment, and it tells you where these segments are overall, not just looking at 1 or 2 parameters, but they look at everything. They've really done a good job of that, and they've been doing that for many years.
Yes, and Commissioner, I would agree with you. I think everybody comes here and lives here because of our beautiful rivers and our beautiful bay, and I think we do need to protect that as much as we can, and that's why we collect this data.
Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Janet.
And again, thank you for your service.
Okay, Janet.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next item will be 9B. This is very germane. You had a flood presentation by Black and Veatch yesterday. This is sewage pump stations and sanitary sewer overflows. We'll be bringing up EPC staff Dan Moore to talk about this. Hi, Dan.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Daniel Moore, EPC staff. In this presentation, I will discuss sanitary sewer overflows, also commonly called SSOs, that occur from sewage collection and transmission systems, with a focus on pump stations and private lift stations. I'll also explain EPC's role regarding these matters and talk about the storm events that occurred last year. Let me get my presentation up. There we go.
There we go.
In addition to conducting inspections at our permitted wastewater facilities, a central duty of EPC staff is to respond to citizen complaints of county waterways. A primary type of complaint that we receive are sanitary sewer overflows, often called in by citizens who see them long before municipal or regulatory staff do. In a county as large as ours, there is a vast system of sewer networks, pressurized lines, force mains, pump stations. This slide is just to give you an idea. Just in the downtown area, you can see how many City of Tampa sewer lines there are. All the green lines are either gravity lines, or the darker ones are pressurized lines. To give you some interesting numbers, within the combined service areas of Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, City of Temple Terrace, and City of Plant City, there are greater than 5,000 miles of sewer lines, greater than 2,500 municipal pump stations, and greater than 3,000 privately owned lift stations. That's a lot of sewage going back and forth every day. Sewage collection and transmission systems are governed by Chapter 62604 of the Florida Administrative Code. It regulates the construction of domestic wastewater systems, both new and existing, municipal and private. It also requires specific spill reporting requirements following a sewage overflow event. EPC is delegated authority to implement this rule in Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, Temple Terrace, and Plant City, and as such, we respond to citizen concerns in all of these municipalities. When problems or failures happen on municipal systems, they have staff that are trained and can timely respond to them. In these photos, you can see City of Tampa and Hillsborough County responding to sewage overflow events on their systems. In the top right photo, they're pumping out a storm system that had received a considerable amount of sewage. They have spill protocols that they implement, which may include collection of bacteria samples from the impacted waterway. This is to get an idea of the water quality, but it can also show decreasing counts in subsequent days. EPC staff is also prepared to collect samples, and we often do, to get an idea of the water quality and impacts. Outside of these less frequent municipal spills, our team has been responding to sewage overflows on a much more widespread basis for years, the majority of these coming from private lift stations. What is a lift station? It's a facility designed to move domestic wastewater from a lower to higher elevation, effectively lift it, and push it out into the municipal collection system, or it could be a private line receiving it. All lift stations should have the following key components: a wastewater receiving well, wet well, which is typically below grade in the ground so it can receive gravity flow, pumps, piping, and associated valves, a system of floats that are used to activate the pumps. As the level rises in the wet well, it will trigger the floats, and then that turns the pump switches on, and an equipment control panel, which should be above ground. They also require high-level emergency alarms, both visible and audible. Sewage overflows from private lift stations are a major source of pollution that EPC staff have routinely investigate. Since January of 2020, we investigated greater than 570 complaints relative to sewage overflows, and 360 of those were from private lift stations. There's one in the county that was spewing upon arrival. No one wants to get sprayed with that. EPC field responses include inspection of the lift station and determining what is actually failing. Are the pumps failing? Are there electrical outages? And the list can go on of problems that happen with them, but we then need to determine an important factor is whether discharges are occurring, and if so, are they going to impacted wetlands or waterways, surface waters. We'll collect lab samples as needed to get an idea of the water quality. We educate the property owners of the lift station of the rule requirements for the system that they own, and we request corrective actions to stop the discharges and conduct timely repairs. As needed for non-compliant cases, we'll issue warning notices, and for the really egregious cases, we'll elevate to enforcement action. In recent years, because of the number of private lift station complaints we were getting, we wanted to create an outreach tool, so we created this guide, which is a trifold brochure that we call the Lift Station Maintenance Guide. It goes over all the information I just gave you and includes the emergency spill reporting numbers, and we've gotten really good feedback from this. We printed out hundreds of them, and we give them out in the field. We've had positive feedback from lift station vendors who asked to use it as a template for other counties that they work in. And the City of Tampa also requested a box to hand out as they come across them in their service area. So we appreciate all those efforts. This is a GIS map that shows the density and locations of the individual lift station complaints done by EPC staff in recent years. It shows the hotspot areas by the darker circles that have a greater number and frequency of complaint investigations. Many are close to the Hillsborough River, especially in the central Tampa, and as you can see in the greater Temple Terrace and University area. A lot of those are near the river, and it's very old infrastructure. Now I'd like to show some of the lift stations we respond to and the kinds of problems that we encounter. Often they are completely inoperable, like the bottom left photo, with the wet well either fully up to the top or overflowing. And when the system is that high, it will surcharge the gravity collection system, and it will push the sewage out to the path of least resistance. And that often are manholes, as you see overflowing in these other photos. The top right photo was a failing lift station that overflowed in the business park off of Memorial Highway last year. That's a considerable one. The sewage was 1 to 2 feet high. It was over a considerable part of the property going into the public parking lots. City of Tampa helped out because that one was so bad. They went and helped the property owner to pump it down, and we were involved several days with that one. Often lift stations are discharging to a wetland or a surface water. In the top left photo, we found this station nearly buried, and it was just slowly overflowing to the environment. They're often out of sight, out of mind, behind a restaurant, in the corner of a plaza, in the back of a residential community, and they're usually in low-lying areas, which is often next to a river or a wetland. At times, they are rapidly spilling, like the top right photo with the geyser-like spray, or the bottom left photo that had overflowed a considerable amount from the concrete wet well. And sometimes manholes are located in the most interesting areas, like this bottom right photo. That's an apartment complex in Town and Country, and it was overflowing, and the manhole's right in the storm canal, which goes to the surface water. Now I'd like to go over a couple examples and give you some actual locations of recent and ongoing cases we have. This lift station is located on the north bank of the Hillsborough River in the Temple Terrace area. It serves 2 large apartment complexes. We responded to citizen complaints reporting active spills from this lift station, and we found it had been operable for several days. At times, we used tracing dye to try to delineate a flow path to show where the sewage is going. It's the same dye that the city uses in the St. Patrick's Day River Green Festival, and it worked out well in this case. Upon our arrival, the station was rapidly overflowing. You can kind of see that the gray water coming out. We added dye, and rapidly, this photo progression shows how quickly it went down the vegetated bank to the Hillsborough River. Within 3 minutes, it had fanned out that much to the river. Multiply that discharge over several days, and you have hundreds of thousands of gallons going to the river. And as such, this case became a high-profile case of ours. It actually started overflowing again in 2022, which caught the attention of the media, as well as more citizens. And it's been an enforcement case with us, and I'm happy to say that they have more permanent corrective actions now. They installed a backup generator, which we observed in the field. They have better telemetry that if the levels get high in the station, it will send digital notifications to both apartment complex offices. And they have much better on-site staff monitoring. It's not so out of sight, out of mind now. Another problematic lift station we had is this one serving an auto store and neighboring restaurant in Brandon. In this case, the station is again in the back next to a retention pond that is covered by that tree canopy that you see in this aerial. We found it overflowing again this past November. On-site staff said it had been down since Hurricane Milton, which was a month prior. So another potential that that one was ongoing for a long time. You can see the damage to the station. A tree had fallen on it. It was inoperable. Again, it was just quietly overflowing below the concrete lip of the wet well to the pond. All of that water that you see there is pretty much sewage, because the weeks after Milton, it was pretty dry, and the odors give it away. There were a lot of trees down, so it was kind of difficult to navigate around there, but we wanted to get an idea of the bacteria count, so we sampled it. Very, very high bacteria, which was suggestive of a sewage discharge that probably had been going on a long time. We got a hold of the corporate entities this time, and they actually spent a good amount of money cleaning the pond out. They pumped out upwards of 200,000 gallons of sewage. They took it to the City of Tampa treatment plant, and we're currently working with them on permanent repairs to the lift station. But in our investigation on that one, we did find it was going to the wetland. There was an outfall structure that you can maybe see on the left side of that photo. They didn't even know about it. It was covered with debris, and so some impact happened to the wetland. And my point with these slides is to show that often there are impacts going on that no one knows about for days. Sewage spills have led to an increased interest by media and citizens in recent times. None of us want sewage flowing out to the environment, right? It's gross, it smells. It definitely can impact water quality with nutrient loads, higher phosphorus, higher nitrogen. It can deplete oxygen, which can lead to fish kills, and of course, algae blooms can be a problem. But most importantly, sewage spills can also present potential public health risk by spreading internal bacteria that can include disease-causing organisms, bloodborne pathogens. Last year's storm season packed a 1-2-3 punch with Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Milton. Debbie dropped a considerable amount of rain, and we actually had a lot of citizen complaints during that period because of high groundwater tables, and it was impairing some of our disposal systems for our treatment plants. So we were just coming off all that workload, and then Helene and Milton showed up, and it wasn't a typical season. In many ways, it was unprecedented. Helene brought significant storm surge. Many pump stations were completely submerged, and most of these are sizable city pump stations along Bayshore, and the master pump station downtown, which is on Cross Street, was inoperable. When you have 6, 7 feet higher of a surge over these pump stations, they're basically rendered inoperable. If the pumps are even working, they can't keep up with the flow. So what's discharging is, bay water mixed with sewage, but it becomes sewage because it's all commingled, and it's a problem. Most of the spills that they reported greater than 7 million gallons, which is a lot, but most of that came from this Cross Street pump station. If you're familiar with the Riverwalk, that is below the crosstown there, and in the background, that is the Cross Street pump station. You see that building? This is a day or two after Helene, and it was still, you could tell, you could smell the sewage there, but the city had put out bacteria signs for, trying to warn the public. And that's another nearby garage that shows, it's just showing again how high the water was. There were submerged cars in that garage. Milton brought another set of headaches. It wasn't the surge, but it was significant wind and rain. Record rainfall and flooding events. Some areas, especially over in Pinellas County, but even some in Hillsborough, received 18 inches of rain in a very short amount of time. The water just it has nowhere to go when that amount of water falls. And it also caused widespread power outages and countless inoperable pump stations and sewage overflows. This is the bottom right photo is a flooded area near University Mall. It's mind-boggling to me to look at these because I grew up in the Forest Hills area. I'm a native here, and this isn't too far from me, just a couple miles, and you think we're in a relatively flat area, but when you get this kind of rainfall, to see stacked water like that, it's just amazing. It had nowhere to go, and you can imagine all the pump stations that were submerged and not working and or with, out of power. Following Milton, we had a greatly increased complaint workload, a lot of calls coming in, a lot of citizens at their wits' end, a lot of them experiencing flooding, which we don't really handle, but we did our best to get them over to either the Stormwater Department or Public Works, and of course those departments were inundated too with calls, but we evaluated spills to the best of our ability and that we could safely do out in the field, and we assisted property owners with the reporting requirements, and if their pump station was down, we went over what was still needed. In that top right photo, you see a tree that fell down. It tore the roof. You can't see the roof was impacted, but it also ruptured water and sewer lines. So a lot of those kind of things happened, and you don't really want people walking through all these ponding wastewaters, but it happens every year. Now, after all this bad news, there is some good news. There are some improvements underway. Municipalities are taking preventative actions for critical infrastructure. City of Tampa was awarded a sizable capital improvements project for their wastewater system, and in the next 5 years, they're going to be working on specific mission-critical areas. Hillsborough County Public Utilities has a replacement and restoration program in place, and they're going to be giving priority to problematic areas. They also implemented a program overseeing private lift stations that are connected to their service area. We work well with that team. It's called the POTS program, and it's really just now starting to get going. It stands for Privately Owned Collection and Transmission Systems. We don't duplicate efforts with them. Sometimes they give the more egregious private pump stations over to us, but they always call us to let us know if there's an environmental impact going on. So we have a very good collaborative relationship. And also, the state rule was recently revised that requires power outage contingency plans for new systems that are permitted. So that's another positive stroke in the right direction. But in conclusion, I'd like to point out that this presentation shows a small slice of what our team deals with day in and day out every year. We work with municipalities and with our citizen response in making timely efforts to stop discharges and prevent environmental pollution and water quality impacts. Intense storm events like we experienced last year put unprecedented stresses on our infrastructure and exacerbated the problems. But there are improvements and preventative plans under evaluation and being implemented by the municipalities, beginning with the most sensitive areas of our infrastructure. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to thank you for the overview. on the sewage station. I don't see anyone in the, yes, Commissioner Cameron Cepeda.
Yes, I would just like to say that is the best presentation that I have ever seen.
Really? Thank you.
Yes, on the
Appreciate it,
sewage pump stations and sanitary sewer overflow. Thank you so much for putting that together. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So anyone else? Thank you so much again for your presentation.
Thank you, Dan. Great job.
Thank you.
Janet?
Thank you, Commissioner. We just have a few executive director slides before we conclude the meeting. If HTV could pull up my slides, please. While we're waiting, I'd like to, for the slides to be pulled up, I'd like to introduce our new communications specialist, Laura Castillo. She's over here. There you go.
Good morning and welcome.
Laura comes from our wetland division, and she applied for the job, and she's doing great. She's doing great. This is her first meeting. So with that, here are my slides. We can go to the next slide. I will let you know that EPC just celebrated its 67th year. February 18th was our EPC's birthday, as well as Diana Lee's birthday. On November 9th, EPC staff attended the Wonders of the Wildlife Festival hosted by the Raptor Center of Tampa Bay. This event was held at Edward Medard Conservation Park and was a great success with visitors of all ages. Next slide. On November 21st, EPC staff participated in the Great American Teach-In by visiting classrooms across the county to share the importance of protecting and preserving our local environment. Next slide, please. Also in November, senior staff hosted our annual Thanksgiving luncheon. We are grateful for your support and service for the commissioners, for our alumni, and for our EPC staff, whose hard work ensures EPC's continued success in fulfilling our mission. Next slide. Over the holiday season, EPC's philanthropic committee supported the Elves for Elder annual holiday drive for seniors in need and the RCMA of Dover, Florida, for 100 students. Our agency is so giving, and I want to thank all the staff for that. Next slide, please. On January 8th, EPC senior staff welcomed Commissioner Bowles and his staff, Elena Skidmore and Kathleen Yates, and hopefully we'll get a boat tour while the weather is still beautiful. On January 10th, next slide, please. On January 10th, EPC staff Rick Marotti spoke at the Hillsborough County Legislative Delegation meeting on behalf of EPC. The legislators were encouraged to direct their constituents to EPC for environmental concerns. Next slide. We're excited once again to join the City of Tampa's annual Martin Luther King Jr. Parade festivities. Despite the morning temperatures being in the mid-50s, it didn't stop us from taking part in this highly esteemed community event. Next slide. We held our annual strategic planning meeting on January 28th. During this session, we evaluate EPC's overall progress in '24. We discussed actions we will need to take in '25 to meet our long-term goals and to ensure that our agency actions are aligned appropriately to achieve desired outcomes. Next slide. On January 28th, EPC staff attended Commissioner Meyer's first town hall meeting of the year in Riverview. It was very well attended, and a lot of good questions were asked. Next slide, please. The Fresh from Florida Ag Breakfast was in February. The breakfast was followed by the Florida Governor's Luncheon. EPC staff was there to support the Florida State Fair events. Next slide, please. On February 7th, the EPC staff, Andy Zodro and Beth Lee, presented at the Hillsborough County Bar Association Environmental Land Use Conference, providing an update on the agency and other important environmental topics. Next slide, please. Also on that day, we celebrated the National Wear Red Day to celebrate American Heart Month. This event raises awareness for heart disease, the leading cause of death in America, especially for women. Next slide. Renovations at the Roger P. Stewart building following Hurricane Milton's damage are nearly complete. We had 20,000 square feet impacted. My staff and I, including code enforcement, which is in our building, it's almost done. I think we move in, the final water division, I think, moves in Monday. But my staff and I really want to sincerely thank John Muller from County Facilities, Mike Renberg, and Deidre Clark, along with Brenda Cogbill from Risk Management and Pam Teal. Those individuals did a Herculean effort to put back together 27,000 square feet of flooding. And again, they're going to do some ongoing things to make sure we don't have stormwater flooding again like that. So, but thank you again, John and team. And with that, next slide. Our next meeting is April 17th. And with that, if anybody doesn't have any questions, we can conclude our meeting.
Okay, I just want to thank you and your staff for always doing, okay, Commissioner Bowles, always doing a wonderful job and making sure that our citizens are heard and you recognize them when they call your office. Just want to say thank you. Commissioner Bowles?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Yesterday, we heard that during our conversation during the BOCC meeting that you may have had some federal funds that were cut from one of the programs. Can you expound on what that is? I'd be interested in.
It's interesting. I watched the meeting. I don't remember that coming up in the meeting. I'll have to go back and watch it again. We do have a pause in our air monitoring section. We use some of those funds for our citizen response group, and so we have put in a decision unit for the citizen response group moving forward with our budget. But also the county, for decades, has done a match for those grants. So I've talked to Tom Fessler. I'll be talking with Bonnie Weiss. And to let everybody know, we met air quality standards for the very first time in this area in 2020. So the air monitoring program is extremely valuable. But I'll be working with, obviously, Bonnie Weiss and the chairperson and let everyone know.
Yeah. Or is that air monitoring also like around the gypsum stacks, or is that countywide?
It's countywide.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. We have lots of different grants, but several of our grants have been put on pause. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any future items from anyone? Seeing none, or hearing none? Our meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.